Please proceed.
Good morning. I am Jennifer Spokes Johansson, and I serve as the Vice Chair of the Generic Animal Drug Alliance, or GADA. The GADA is an independent professional trade organization that represents the interests of generic animal drug companies. Our members are focused on the development, FDA approval, and marketing of high-quality generic drugs for livestock and pets. I would like to thank the committee for inviting me to testify today on behalf of GADA in support of the reauthorization of AGDUFA, the Animal Generic Drug User Fee Act. Just like with human drugs, generic animal drugs provide significant benefits to the public by providing cost-effective alternatives to their pioneer drug counterparts. Lower-cost generic animal drug options help contribute to the safety of the nation's food supply, the treatment of diseases in animals that can be transmitted to humans, and the ability of pet owners to provide care to their pet family members. However, the potential cost savings to consumers from generic animal drugs cannot be achieved without broad availability of such drugs. Therefore, it is critical that the CVM review and approval process for generic drugs is both efficient and predictable. AGDUFA was a successful first step in achieving these goals. Prior to the implementation of AGDUFA, a single CVM review of a generic application could take longer than 2 years. In most cases, multiple review cycles are needed, so if an application required 3 review cycles, it could take more than 6 years for that application to receive approval. In the time it took to get the application approved, the entire market for the generic drug could change, making it no longer cost-effective to market the drug. This created a disincentive for companies to pursue generic animal drug approvals and denied the public cost-effective generics to treat their livestock and pets. During the term of AGDUFA, CVM eliminated the application backlog and reduced the review time goal for a single review of an application to the current 270 days. In addition, CVM implemented several process enhancements and increased communications with industry. While user fees are a significant cost to a small industry, we believe the fees have not created too much of an impediment to pursuing generic animal drug applications. In fact, we believe user fees serve as a desired gating mechanism to ensure sponsors are serious about their intent to pursue applications to approval. Furthermore, we believe the shorter review times and predictability of the review timeline are helping contribute to the growth of our industry. This growth is evidenced by the significant increase in our GADA membership, as well as an increase in the number of application sponsors paying user fees. AGDUFA 2, as agreed upon, will continue the shortened application review times from AGDUFA. While GADA would like CVM to achieve the statutory 180-day review times, the additional fees for CVM to obtain the resources needed to reach that goal are not a viable option for the generics industry. The animal generics industry is comprised of small companies and product markets that are much smaller than those for human drugs. Therefore, we believe it is important that the review of generic drug applications be primarily funded by congressional appropriations. For this to be achieved, appropriations must continue at a level that enables FDA to meet its public health mission and the important public policy goal of providing generic drug options for farmers and pet owners. Financially, we believe AGDUFA 2 strikes a balance between the much-needed revenue stream for CVM and the realities of a small but growing generics industry. However, another important industry goal for AGDUFA 2 was to implement additional review process enhancements that recognize high-quality submissions and shorten overall time to approval. The proposed AGDUFA 2 enhancements will make the approval process easier to navigate, will help generic companies better meet CVM's approval expectations, and should help reduce the number of review cycles. We expect this will enable more generic products to come to market sooner. In conclusion, it is extremely important to the generic animal drug industry that AGDUFA be reauthorized. Without timely reauthorization of AGDUFA, we likely will return to the pre-AGDUFA days when lengthy application reviews served as a disincentive to companies pursuing generic animal drugs. Reauthorization of AGDUFA is critical to continuing to make the pursuit of generic animal drug approvals viable, and to continuing to increase the number of safe and effective generic animal drugs on the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johansson. We'll now start a 5-minute round of questions. Dr. Carnevale, I'll start with you. Again, just for the record, if ADUFA were not reauthorized, what do you think would be the impact on animal health? How would it affect ranchers, farmers, and pet owners if we did not reauthorize it by October 1st?
Well, Senator, clearly FDA would have to lose a number of resources that they have now, a number of staff that they've hired on to do those reviews faster. So clearly the review times would slip back, as Dr. Donovan mentioned earlier, back to what they had been before. So the process will slow down even more than it is now. It is a very rigorous review process, and we understand that we're always working to try to shorten that time. Without those resources, those times will just dramatically increase. And as far as farmers and ranchers, there are very few drugs that are approved now. It's very difficult to get a drug through the process. And when it does go through, it's very important to those farmers and ranchers. So unfortunately, this will probably decrease an incentive to develop those drugs if the process is taking longer than it does today.
Thank you. Mr. Johansson, again, for the record, tell me again, what role do generic drugs for animals play in animal health? How do they help ranchers, farmers, and pet owners?
Generic drugs give alternative to the brand drugs or the pioneer drugs that are equivalent. They're equivalent in safety and effectiveness and quality, but they're lower cost options. So this provides a cost benefit for farmers, for pet owners, for ranchers, and often may enable a treatment that a pet owner or a rancher couldn't afford in the first place.
So what would be the same question I asked Dr. Carnevale, what would be the effect if AGDUFA were not reauthorized? What would be the impact on ranchers, farmers, and pet owners if it were not reauthorized in time?
Right, so as Dr. Carnevale mentioned, FDA would have to reduce their staffing, and then they would not be able to review the applications in a timely manner. And this would mean that less options, whether it be pioneer drugs or generic drugs, would be available to ranchers, farmers, and pet owners. In the generics industry, we just had our first AGDUFA legislation 5 years ago. So just 5 years ago, we really were in that world where it was taking 700 days or more for a review. And it was not incentivizing companies to pursue those generic drug options.
Thank you both very much. Senator Alexander.
Mr. Carnevale, give us a little historical perspective on the importance of animal health to human health. My memory of history is that throughout world history and in our country, that many epidemics have been spread by unhealthy animals. And in the early days of North America, the arrival of the Europeans with animals led to smallpox and wiped out whole populations. Is that where all of this begins? This concern about the relationship of healthy animals to healthy people?
Yes, well, fortunately, we don't have outbreaks like smallpox any longer, but clearly there is a nexus between animal and human health. Diseases are spread, as we all know, between animals and humans. And the fact is, the healthier that we can keep our animals, the healthier we can keep humans, because particularly with the food supply, it has been shown that animals that are not healthy, that might go to slaughter with subclinical disease, the meat from those animals may be more tainted with bacteria than those animals that are kept healthy. So there is a long history of maintaining that animal health through vaccines. Vaccines are very important, as well as animal drugs. So both of those go hand in hand to keep our food animals healthy so that they don't spread those diseases to humans. Of course, there have been other measures besides the use of technologies. There's been the way we've raised animals with good biosecurity techniques to keep them from being infected by pathogenic organisms that could transfer to humans. But the whole arena of agriculture, including the use of the technologies we're talking about here, has improved to maintain that separation of animal disease from human disease.
We don't have to go back very far to find the time, maybe it was the 1930s, let's say, when there were almost no, well, there wasn't the pharmaceutical industry, really. There was almost no drugs for human health. How far back do we have to go to find the development of drugs for animal health?
I would say that probably in the 1950s is when we really
Not before
started.
then.
Probably not before them. I mean, I think there were probably remedies out there. There was no organized drug business, but I think probably in the 1950s, antibiotics started to become used in animals. And so it's a fairly new industry.
Mr. Hansen, you mentioned the 270-day timeline, and it sounded like what you were saying was that it was too expensive to aim for a 180-day timeline, to try to take that 700-day period and get it down to 180. Is that right? That would just cost too much in user fees to do that. Was that the consensus?
Well, to take the 270-day
Yeah.
time period and bring it down to 180 days, right, would cost too much in user fees.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Alexander. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a very general question, and the answer to it is yes. If I can find it here. Dr. Carnavelli, I've been getting feedback, all of us who are privileged to represent agriculture states and the animal drug community, that while there may be some minor tweaks or changes to the user fee programs that various folks would recommend, generally, that my impression is that you support a clean bill, and we have a clean bill. And as the chairman indicated, we hope that we could be successful on the Senate floor, and that we would have your support. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
All right. Let me veer off into another concern that I have, but it also involves a thank you to you and all of the veterinary associations from all of our states. As a former member of the Intelligence Committee and was chairman for a while, I was always worried about a possible attack on our food supply. And obviously that deals with the animal industry. And we had several exercises, and one, I was privileged, if that's the proper word for it, to play the role of the president. I emphasized there wasn't anybody else in town, so they had to get somebody. But I think it was because of my experience on the Ag Committee and on the Intel Committee, and we went under attack. This was an exercise, and there's been numerous exercises like this. Following those exercises, and I won't go into any detail, but some very difficult times we went through what would happen in regards to an attack like hoof and mouth, and what would happen to the animal industry. And it was pretty bad. Now that's some years ago. I think we have a much better understanding of that. That threat still exists. It's easy to do by any terrorist group, but the veterinarians in Kansas, at least, and this comes down to county level, have done an excellent job of doing training to be first responders if anything like that would happen. And they know the criteria that they're supposed to follow, and they have repeatedly gone to meetings, statewide and even national meetings, on this subject. I just want to thank your center for what you have been doing, and I hope you've been doing in regards to any possible threat to our food supply. And the fact that one of the first responders is your local veterinarian, who also, by the way, has a lot of trust wherever that person may be practicing. Do you have any comment?
No, thank you for that. I think our industry has been very forward-looking in trying to provide the vaccines that are needed for those kinds of threats, and I know that's the top of their mind ever since 9/11. As you said, we've been going through those exercises. And I would only say that we are very fortunate in this country to have as safe a food supply as we do. And I think people take it for granted because those threats, as well as common threats from bacteria and viruses that don't come from terrorism, are also a threat to the food supply. And I think the farmers, the ranchers, the veterinarians, the animal drug industry all do a marvelous job of keeping our food supply safe. But those threats are there, and you're right, we have been very lucky, but I think we've also prepared very well. And I think our industry has helped with those preparations in trying to make sure the vaccines for those viral diseases that could come from terrorism are out there and ready to be used if necessary. So thank you for that, Senator.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Roberts. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Dr. Carnevale. Thank you, Mr. Johansson, for your involvement in this effort. Hopefully, as you have heard from all of us and we've heard from you, we hope to keep this a clean bill and get it moved expeditiously through the Senate, and hopefully the same thing will happen on the House side. Thank you all very much. The record will remain open for 10 days for further submissions by other senators, and with that, the meeting will stand adjourned.